What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Files podcast, where we talk about our favorite fantasy series and topics. I am your lone co-host, or I guess host, today, joined by Thomas Howard Riley, the author of my number one favorite book of 2022, and so far my favorite novella of 2023. Man, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real treat to be here, and I'm just, honored to be on the show.
Nice. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun talking about his new novella, newish novella.
Well, not a novella,
Not a
exactly.
novella. Yeah, that's what you're calling it.
We
'Cause
tried to
it's
make it a novella. It it ran long.
a little bit
So
long. Yeah.
it is a whole ass book now, as they say,
A
despite my
whole
best
ass
efforts.
book. Yeah. But yeah, that is called The Monsters We Feed. I have a spoiler-free review for it on the channel from I think just a few weeks ago. I'll link it up in the annotations. And yeah, you can check that out if you would like some more spoiler-free info on it. We will be doing a couple spoiler-free questions on this podcast episode just to, get some more insight on the creative process of this book. But otherwise, we're pretty much going to be going balls deep, as they say, in spoilers. So just be prepared for that. But we'll give you a fair spoiler warning beforehand. But before we go into any of that, just to let you guys know, you can reach out to us on Twitter and Discord, which are linked in the description. And we also just launched a Patreon page if you guys would like to support us there, because this is a pretty expensive hobby when it all adds up every month. So if you guys would like to support us on Patreon, we'd very much appreciate it. We have some rewards, like you can get your name shouted out in an episode, like Shad Zaman, who backed us at the Night Angel tier. Thank you very much, man. Other than that, we have downloadable bookmarks that I'm going to create for you guys over there. And it has like the Fantasy Files logo on it. And I'm sure I'll come up with quite a few of them over time. And then pretty soon we'll have some exclusive content over there. We're talking about doing this thing called Fantasy Files After Dark, where all four co-hosts get together and we just talk about whatever we want, completely unhinged. So if you guys would like to be a part of that, then backing us on Patreon is the way to do so. But also, if you can't support financially, that's totally fine. If you just subscribe and like the video, that is more than enough. It helps us so much to get seen by the algorithm like that and get new people just like you into our little community. So yeah, I think that's all my intro stuff. So we're gonna go into talking with Thomas Howard Riley. And I guess the first thing I'll ask is, have you read anything good lately? Have you had time to read anything lately, Thomas?
Negative. We are have a new baby, and it is sucking up every spare second of time that I have. It is sucking up time that I don't have. So my reading, we're starting to get things settled in, and starting to sleep longer and stuff like that. But
That's good.
Anybody who knows having a new baby, it takes a lot out of you for the first, few months or whatnot. So I hope
Yeah.
to get back to it soon, because for some reason my TBR keeps growing.
Uh-huh.
Despite the fact that I'm not reading anything, somehow new books keep popping up. I have an itchy trigger finger when it comes to buying new books,
Okay.
and so that part is still ongoing.
Nice.
But I just have so hope to get back to that soon, because I've been missing reading quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I've been reading the Wayward Pines series by Blake Crouch. And have you heard of this
I hear good
series?
things about that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it is so amazing. It's very not quite Twilight Zone, but almost like, I don't know, it seems like something that may have happened on like the X-Files or something like that. Basically, it's this guy who gets in a car accident and wakes up in the hospital in this random town in Idaho called Wayward Pines. And it's very like Stepford Wives-y. Like the whole town is just like a little creepy and a little too perfect,
Oh,
and
I like that
people
kind
are
of vibe.
a little
Yeah.
too smiley, a little too happy. And then he realizes that he cannot leave the town. And so it's the first book is him kind of trying to figure out what's going on there. And Blake Crouch has not had a miss for me yet, man. It is his books
No,
are
he's
so
fantastic.
incredible, so good. I read Recursion and Dark Matter, I think last year. It was either last year or early this year that I finished them. And man, those like just he just hasn't had a single miss. And yeah, anyway, if the viewers are interested, I'm doing a spoiler talk on the Wayward Pines trilogy with the Fantasy for the Ages podcast. That'll be up probably well before this episode goes up. So if you'd like to check that out, go to the Fantasy for the Ages YouTube channel and you can see me over there. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've been doing lately. I'm glad to hear the baby stuff is going well though. It's fun to have a new one. I'm assuming.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it is what it is. It's just the time
Yeah.
is a difficult thing because you go from having two people working on one thing to two people working on two things.
Yeah. You,
It's exponentially more difficult.
yeah. You were saying something funny before we started recording that having one baby is like having one baby, and then having two babies is like having 10.
Yes, yeah. Having two is not like having two babies. It's more like having 10. It's just a
The
big jump
snowball
in
effect.
complexity, yeah,
Yeah.
difficulty. But I had obviously you have an idea it's going to be more difficult, but then when the rubber hits the road, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay,
Oh wow.
this was a little bit more even than I expected, and I expected it to be pretty tough. So, but
Well,
it definitely is rewarding underneath it all. So I
that's
take
good.
the bad with the good.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the monsters we feed,
All
and
right, I'm ready.
we'll do just a couple spoiler-free questions so that we can spend the majority of our time on the spoiler talk, which I'm sure is what we really want to get into. And first off, I just want to say, and I know we've talked about this on Twitter, you know this, but dude, I loved this book. Like I love the monsters we feed
I'm
so
so glad.
much.
I
like
like to hear it.
I went in knowing that I would like it, but it's always that thing of like when an author you love writes a series you love or a book you love, and then there's like another one that's in the same series but it follows different characters. There's always kind of that feeling of like, will I like the new characters? Will I enjoy how this is done? And
that fear is also inhabits me as I
yeah.
was writing it because yeah, it's not a direct sequel or even a direct prequel really to
Mm,
my debut, and on top of that it's a completely different type of story. Like
right.
it's like my debut and its upcoming sequels are much more epic fantasy, like full on balls to the wall epic fantasy.
Yeah.
I mean, it has same dark elements, same obsessions and stuff, but it's much more expansive. This was a much more intimate, you
Mm,
know, close to home, more individual character driven story than that.
yeah.
And so I did have some worry there
Yeah.
that people who liked We Break Immortals might not be their cup of tea, because some
Right.
people are very specific about their tastes and whatnot. But all the feedback I've been getting so far has been pretty positive. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and you used a perfect word to describe this book, intimate. And I think what this book did really well was it took the way I felt about some of my favorite scenes from We Break Immortals and kind of condensed all of all of those feelings into like one shorter book. And so you're following Jathan the whole time, and all of these really personal things are happening, and you're in his head a lot and just kind of very very close with this character throughout the whole book, and kind of seeing his ups and downs and the things that he kind of has to do and survive. And I think that all of those worked really really well because, like you said, in We Break Immortals, it's much more expansive, which I like, for its own sake. But in this, it was cool just to get you're focused on one character, one story, just a few events that are
Right.
taking
Yeah.
place, and you get the opportunity to with less things going on, you have the opportunity to go like deeper and see it more intimately. And I
Correct.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely was keen to do that because um, we Break Immortals being part of a big series that I've planned out, it has a lot of um, threads that are left open, and it has a lot more stuff going on in it because the arcs will be bending over many books
Right.
before you get to the end. And I wanted to have, start doing some shorter, more self-contained standalone books, whether they become series or not. Just I wanted to start doing some where I could get to the end right away and be able to have those arcs come to their satisfying conclusions in the same book, write a book basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I was really excited to be able to do that, to be able to take a character from one thing and get him to that conclusion ultimately of where his character was going to go, in a self-contained story that way. But I still wanted to keep, the main elements of my storytelling. I still wanted to use incredible world building. I still
Yeah.
wanted to have um, powerful conversations, dialogue between characters. I wanted to have. I remember you had talked about some of the scenes you liked in We Break Immortals were scenes that where the chapter was just a conversation, like
Yeah.
where
Yep.
some of the conversations were those deep, meaningful ones where characters, uh, they finally get it
Right.
of what's going on there, and so I wanted to keep those types of things because I love writing those types of conversations in books, that kind of dialogue. So hopefully I was able to condense it the right way. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. It really feels like, have you seen the show Andor?
Yes, yeah, I love that show.
Okay, so it feels a lot like Andor, where it's like this 100% feels like it is in the world of what do you call it, Lumina World,
Hmm.
and it feels very familiar, but also giving you a very different story compared to what we see in We Break Immortals. Like our main character doesn't have any like real magic or anything. He's got a great device that he uses,
Yeah,
but he doesn't really have any power in his own right. He doesn't really even have any
that was
station.
yes, yeah, that was I intentionally set out to do that. Like this book kind of came out of like a challenge,
Mm-hmm.
which was to try to go against what I usually like to do,
Right.
like go like do a 180. um because and obviously I don't just write warriors and wizards. Like,
Mm-hmm.
one of the key characters of We Break Immortals is just an investigator. He's just a
Right.
bookworm. His main power is that he knows a lot of shit and knows where to point the people who do have the power, and eventually he gets develops sort of a thing on his own, but it's not an active power. He develops a very passive power, you know
Yeah.
and so I wanted to take that to an extreme and make a guy who is literally not a warrior, not a wizard, not even like he doesn't even have an important job. Like
Right.
he's basically
Yeah.
the orphan son of some, kind of upper class. Like I wouldn't call them like the kind of nobility that visit the
Right.
king's court or whatever it might be, but they're
Yeah.
like maybe more of like the lower level landed gentry type people. Like they have a nice house in a good part of the town, but the when the parents, when they're out of the picture, they just are kind of like having their day jobs and
Yeah.
then partying at night, and they're just kind of relying on the fact that they have this nice house that was already paid for.
Right.
And then they're just like living, the fantasy medievalish version of living paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
But they just happen to have this nice house so that they don't feel what other people in their situation feel. And that's part of Jathan's disconnect, the main character.
Right.
At the beginning, he has a lot of disconnects
Yeah,
in
he
this
does.
book. His whole like the whole my whole idea for him was to make his entire comprehension of his world be a disconnect and
Yeah.
know it.
Yep.
And then like I wanted to start with a guy who thought he knew everything. And he
Hmm.
does know a lot of stuff
Yeah.
about his city. Obviously, he grew up, he was
Yeah.
born there, he's lived there his whole life. But I wanted him to think he knows about everything and then slowly have that onion peeled back to find out that he actually didn't know anything about anything. Like every thing that he was so sure about
Yep.
turns out to have a twist to it, or just outright be completely wrong. Sometimes in horribly tragic, um, traumatic ways. Um, some of the things he learns about what's going on. But that was part of my goal was like when I set out to write this is I wanted to take somebody who I guess they call him you could call him like an unlikable character.
Yeah.
So a lot of people do. Um, but he does, I mean he does have redeeming qualities. Like
Yeah.
he's not like he's an asshole, but he's not like 100 like the Guardians of the Galaxy. He's not a 100% total dick. Like he loves his friends. He loves his sister. Has a pretty powerful bond with her because of what happened to their parents. And like he would do, in his normal life, he would do anything for his sister and for his friends.
Yeah.
Like he's the kind of guy who, if you tell him you're going to go fight somebody on the other side of the bar, he will just go do it, no questions asked. He's that kind of a friend,
Yeah.
which is good to have, but can also cause trouble
Yeah.
when he expects the same return. But so he does have these things, like a lot of the things that are bad about him are things that are derived from his misconceptions and where he thinks he's doing the good thing and
Right.
doesn't realize what his actions are actually doing. So
Yeah. Yeah. He's such a good character in the way that like you can definitely call him an unlikable character, but that doesn't mean that I don't like him. Like
right,
throughout the
yeah,
whole.
he's not a like a supreme anti-hero type person or a villain that you root for. Like
Right.
he's
Like,
just got his flaws.
yeah, like around every corner through every decision that he made, and he makes a lot of just really terrible decisions, just
Especially
so.
toward the end, yeah.
Yeah.
Of
And
the book.
there's been so many times where I'm like, oh, I cannot agree with what he's doing. But around every corner, I am rooting for him at every
Hmm.
turn and just there for the ride with him.
Hmm.
He's so great.
Yeah, I mean he goes through the whole story. That one another part of my challenge was I wanted to write a whole story where the main character has no magical powers and he never once picks up a sword.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
in the whole book he never holds a sword by the hilt. I mean at one point he technically holds a sword because he's holding like a melon fruit that the blade is stuck into, and then he hits somebody with the hilt of the sword. So I
Right.
mean if you want to parse it that way, but
Sure.
technically he never wields a sword the traditional way,
Right.
by a hilt. So that was part of my challenge in trying to do this story. But I mean, this story really fell together. Like it kind
Yeah.
of fell into my lap. The idea for it was spawned out of like I was trying to think of ideas to write a novella, as we talked about earlier. I was
Hmm.
trying. This was intended to be a novella at the beginning, and I was like, well, let me think of a little idea in one of my stories. And I remember that it was all started with the monocle because that's like the key, the little looking glass crystal lens with the different filters on it that uh, the glass eyes who hunt rogue magic users in this world use.
Hmm.
And it wasn't even in my debut, but just a part of my world building that I like to toss out world building tidbits just for fun. One of the tidbits is that those monocles are the crystals that they're made out of, like the crystal lenses, are like extremely expensive
Mm.
to mine and to find and to produce. They're very rare and the process is very expensive. So
Right.
these little devices are worth their weight in gold, basically. Like they're very valuable to have. And so sometimes the investigators who use them get jumped
Right. Yeah.
by unsavory individuals who may be intending to make a quick buck, or at least try to off of stealing, smacking them over the head and stealing it and then trying
Right.
to sell it on the black market. And so that's where this story came from. That was literally the idea.
Oh,
Was like,
okay.
okay, I'll just take that take that tidbit that I, shared on Twitter and be like, I'll make a story out of this. And like, where do I go from there? And it all started from there.
Okay.
Um, and then from there, I was like, I just came up with the characters, the ideas, the concept of him thinking he knows everything, and then having that unravel. Um, the concept of him like, and it starts really when he finds the monocle. Like that's the first time that things
Yeah.
start to unravel, is because he can suddenly see everything that's going on that was happening all along, but he didn't know,
Right.
because the when people use magic, the residue of magic, sometimes it's visible temporarily for a little bit, the little sparklies and colors and whatever, but
Right.
for the most part it's invisible. So you can't actually, you can see the result of magic, like what it, somebody explodes a building or lights somebody on fire, or throws a ball up in the air with magic. You can see that happen, but you can't see the residue of magic. It's invisible unless you have that lens. And so I basically, once he gets that lens, I liken it to a person like, you've been using your bathroom in your house or wherever, or at work or whatever, for years and years and years, and then suddenly turn on a black light in there and see what happens.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of like that, where all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what? Oh my God, I can't tell. What is this? What? I can't touch anything. Like, and so I wanted his experience was basically like that, except to the whole world. Like suddenly his whole world is that bathroom, and he's all of a sudden seeing all this stuff that wouldn't have bothered him before because he didn't know it was there. But now that he
Right.
knows it's there, it is a shock to the system, and
Yeah.
it just um, sets off all these things in his head, and he gets that. And this, I'm not giving too much away. This
Right.
happens in the first chapter, but
Yeah.
he gets it starts to get an obsession about it,
Yeah.
because he's a two sides of the coin kind of guy. Like on the one side, he's like disgusted that this stuff is going on around him because he hates magic users. Like that's one of
Right.
his key core things for him. But on the other hand, he becomes obsessed with the fact that he can see it and nobody else can now.
Would
Like
you
now
call it like
he
morbid
has this like,
curiosity?
yeah, well, but it's more like, it's kind of that, but
Yeah.
it's even more so, that he has a secret and a thing that he can do that nobody else can. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Like he's in a dark world, and suddenly he's the only one who has the night vision.
Yeah. Right.
and and like, if you find a set of night vision goggles in the park one day, you're like, I should really give this back. I don't really need to see all this stuff going on, but now I can, and nobody else know. I can see
Right.
all this cool
Yeah.
stuff, and it starts to like, build in him, and it drives him to pretty extreme, because he's a kind of an extreme kind of person. So it kind
Right.
of builds to an extreme conclusion there. But
Right.
yeah, that sets him off on a journey of discovery, not just self discovery, but discovery of the place that he lives in, and finds out what's really going on, not just what's really going on with magic, but things that
Yeah.
are really going on with poverty, and with the class system that exists in this society, that
Yeah.
he was not aware of, that he didn't think about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because he grew. You learn in the book, he technically spent a little while living in the slummiest part of the in Tenement
Right.
Lane. But as they talk about it, you learn that he lived on the outside. He
Yeah.
lived on for that part of town. He lived on the place with windows where you could actually see
Right.
the sky, where you could see
Yeah.
the rest of the city and know
Yeah.
things were out there. And even the people in that place are like that. There's a big difference between that
Right.
and living your whole life in the middle, because
Yeah.
the slum part of the town, or part of the city, is made of these giant tenement blocks that are like,
Yeah.
they're basically like those big, the big Roman style apartments, where lots of people, except
Okay.
drawn to an extreme, like
Yeah.
4 or 5 stories high,
Right.
enormous, like, so. And because it's a place where you live and you work and you eat and you play in this area,
Yeah.
there
Kind of like a projects or
it's,
something.
yeah, kind of like something like that, where it originally started off as a good idea that some king in the past had to build these grandiose
Hmm.
things to have people live in, and then over time, uh you know wear and tear, corruption, uh disuse, apathy from government officials, because over the decades or whatnot,
Yeah.
they go into disrepair, and then suddenly what used to be like, you know, 5 kings ago used to be the crown jewel of the city is
Yeah.
now kind of the worst part of it. And I mean, you can sort of see the on the cover of the book. It was a wonderful representation
Yeah.
that Jake Elwood Designs did for the cover. Really, that's kind of what it's like, and that's kind of like Jathan, you know, about to take the first step into this
Tenement Lane.
and it's kind of a maze too. Like they call it Tenement
Yeah.
Lane, but it's not just a street, it's
Right.
a maze. It is a labyrinth of interconnected tunnels, walkways, arches, bridges, uh, and the streets all, bend and curve. Like
Yeah.
the longest street that's in a straight line is maybe an eighth of a mile. The rest
Right.
of the place, it's just all these winding turns. And actually, one of Jathan's superpowers, like his ability, is his ability to memorize pathways.
Right.
And so he runs really fast. Those
Yeah.
are his two skills.
Yep.
He uh, from when as a child he used to race his sister, because his sister was very good at running,
Hmm.
and they used to race each other across the city.
Right.
And she would always have to go around, because Tenement Lane is kind of like in the middle of the city.
Right.
um, and she would have to go around. And so, because she was so much faster than he was, um, he had to learn ways to compensate for that. And so he
Right.
developed this ability to memorize. Uh, as they say, he's the only person in the city. Like he knows how to walk those streets better than the people who live in that
Right.
area do,
Yeah.
because of that. And he's a fast runner. Those two things come in handy for him throughout the book,
Yeah.
quite a bit. But
I so I loved Tenement Lane so much. I loved the entire city of Colchin, but
mhm.
Tenement Lane is basically like what I have been asking for so long from authors, like just this just dirty city that is like fun
Good.
to run around in and is sketchy and is kind of a labyrinth. And
Yes.
it literally ticked all of the boxes. I loved every
Awesome.
single
Yeah.
scene in Tenement Lane when he's like going from rooftop to rooftop and kind of making his way around and hiding in the shadows and going through these underpass type things and just all of these little passageways and secret kind of hallways and stuff or alleyways that he goes through. And I loved this city so
I
much.
wanted it to feel iconic, so I'm glad that it
Yeah.
came across that way. I really wanted it to be, because it's like a city within a city, because
Yeah.
because Colchin has its
It is a
neighborhoods. Like,
culture of its own.
yeah, I mean, there are parts of this city that are like the shopping malls that you would go to on
Right.
the weekend. There are places where like where they live near the government district, where the buildings have wide streets. There are different degrees. Like he talks about going to Beachside, where it's like,
Right.
not exactly a slum, but not exactly a nice part of town. Like there's other, uh, districts throughout the place that have different degrees of trouble, different degrees of poverty and whatnot. But I wanted Tenement Lane to be its own thing. I wanted it to feel distinct,
Yeah.
like it was a truly was like a whole different world existing within the world that he knew.
That's what it felt like. And something that just popped into my head, I don't know if this would have been around your time, but did you ever see the show Dexter's Laboratory?
Oh yes, I have. I
Like
have
the
seen that.
old cartoon?
I've seen some of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not a religious watcher of the
Sure.
show, but I have definitely
Yeah.
caught it. Yes.
There's one episode somewhere in that show where Dexter goes like way deep into his laboratory, like way in there, and it's like a completely like it goes so far that he totally forgot it had existed, and it was really easy to like get lost back there, and it just keeps going and going, and it turns into like a completely different atmosphere than what the like front of his laboratory is.
Oh,
And
that
that's
sounds exactly like Tenement Lane. Yeah.
yeah, and that's kind of what this reminded me of. I'm pretty sure there's even a line. I'm pretty sure there's even a line in there somewhere where Jathan says something like, you could go into Tenement Lane and never find your way out. Like you could get
Hmm.
lost in there and just never be able to make it out of there because it's so deep and so twisty.
Hmm.
And I just thought that that was the coolest idea. And I'm curious, is there a do you have a map?
Oh no, no, not specifically
Yeah,
of that, but I mean, just generally the city itself and where the different districts are kind of located
right.
relative to one another. But no, definitely no street map
Yeah,
of Tenement Lane.
right. All right. Well, we are I feel like we're getting pretty close to spoilers. So why don't we switch over to our spoiler chat? Viewers, if you are leaving us right now because you haven't read The Monsters We Feed, obviously I highly recommend it. I recommend going and checking out my review for it that was linked above earlier. I'll probably also put it in the description if you'd like to just hop down there and click on it. But yeah, obviously a very, very, very high recommend from me. So we're gonna go into spoilers in
Okay, and
three,
there's some pretty big spoilers.
one. You've been warned.
Okay, good.
All right, man. So I guess first I'll ask you, is there anything that you've been super itching to talk about?
I mean, the whole thing.
Okay.
Any topic, I am definitely down to talk about
Okay.
it. So yeah, I'll follow your lead, man, wherever you'd like to go.
Okay, so I will say that by now it's been a little while since I've read this, and it took
Mhm.
me a while to get through it just because I'm a slow reader. So I may have to lean on you for some information I may have forgotten. Um,
I know an expert, so I will
for sure,
tap an
yeah.
expert.
Okay. So yeah, I would love to talk about Jathan's character arc,
Sure.
and he goes from hating magic users because of this thing that he has believed about his parents for his whole
Mhm.
life because Lyra has been afraid
Yeah.
to tell him.
Yes, yeah,
And,
that's the big twist because there's a throughout the story it's ongoing like that he discovers a new part of a new thing that's wrong. There's a new little twist that he discovers kind of near the end of every chapter, more or
mhm,
less, like where he discovers a new part of his world that he wasn't aware of, or a new thing that scares him, or what have you.
right.
And there, like he discovers that there's magic everywhere. Then he discovers, oh wait, this magic is actually closer to home than I thought.
Yeah.
And he thinks that like someone has been like he becomes convinced somebody would because he finds it on the doorknob to their house or like the
Right.
door handle, and
And
so
on
he
Lyra's
becomes
clothes and
convinced
stuff.
that somebody must be stalking his, he assumes that somebody's stalking his sister because his sister is known for having had some uh
Various lovers.
tumultuous
Yeah.
relationships. um and you find out why later on, why she dives into so many of these difficult relationships is because she,
Wants to get out.
like then that's her twist, like is that
Yeah.
he is convinced that this city is the greatest place on earth,
Right.
and that no, he can't comprehend anybody feeling any other way.
Right.
Like he can't comprehend somebody else growing up their whole life in the city not loving it the way he does. And
Right.
he reacts to his, like the past for him, like basically when he was about 10-ish, and his sister who's a little bit older, so she might have been like 15-ish at the time, maybe 16. um their parents are murdered. They come home one day to find the law enforcement of this place cleaning up the house, cleaning up a crime scene. Basically, they don't get to see their parents' bodies, they just see the aftermath.
Hmm.
And part of the after, like like the blood, the where the bodies were positioned. But part of that aftermath was that they saw the residue of magic
Right.
at the scene. And so 10-year-old Jathan becomes convinced that, rightly so, based on what he sees, that he becomes convinced that magic users are what killed him. And the law enforcement that's there at the time are the anti magic user law enforcement individuals. Those are the ones investigating the scene of their crime or whatever.
Right.
And so and that develops into his hatred, and then he and his sister are split up and sent into like the medieval version of, you know, foster care
Right.
that exists in this world. And then she tries to get him back, bring them back together because they have a strong, you know, brother sister bond.
Right.
And so the only way the officials will let them come back together is if they have this house or can keep their parents' house. And so she goes through all this trouble to do that, to get him back.
Yeah.
um
And
and
he kind of assumes.
he
Yeah.
misinterprets that as her loving the house as much as he does.
Right.
And his way of expressing love and that grief for his parents is by latching on to the house they lived in, the city they lived in, and holding on with both hands.
Right.
And he doesn't understand that her reaction is the opposite. Her
Mhm.
reaction is she wants to get out of there. Like, she brings it up multiple times, he blows it off. He's like, yeah, you don't really mean that, you know, that kind of
Right.
thing. But deep down, like, she really does.
Yeah.
um and so he becomes convinced, because she keeps trying to leave. Like, he thinks she gets in tumultuous relationships because she's just bad at picking partners.
Right.
But the real reason, and that may be true, but the real reason is that she's picking people who offer the chance to get the hell out of there.
Right.
Like people who offer to like take her on a ship to an exotic city, or people who say that they know people in another country where they can take her, you know, anywhere, anything. And so he becomes convinced that it's just another one of these tumultuous relationships coming to like
Right.
stalk her. And maybe one of these men that she was with was a that she tried to date was a magic user and is now stalking her or some other thing. And
Right.
then he learns later on that the he finds the residue in their house. And he becomes convinced that, like, oh no, this isn't somebody stalking her, she's seeing someone
Yeah.
who is a magic user. And he's like, so she's hiding this from me, that she's been seeing a man who has somebody, man or woman, whoever, who has the power that makes them the kind of person that I hate. Like, and
Right.
he hates magic. Like, the opening scene of the book is him tattling on a magic user that he saw to the law enforcement in exchange for cash,
Right. Yeah,
so that
that's
they can
right.
go pick that person up and arrest them. And so he very much does not like these people who
Yeah.
use magic, because and it all stems back to his parents. You know, it all stems back
Yeah.
to that traumatic event for him. So he's and that and so that it keeps, every time he keeps getting more and more of a twist. And then uh it goes back and forth until where you're thinking, okay, maybe the real twist is that, you
Yeah.
know, his sister is the one using man. And that kind of, I wanted to keep that on the fence as
Yeah.
much as possible. Like,
It was great.
I wanted that to be a thing where, because I kind of figured people would sort of maybe get that idea. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to very much keep it on the fence, because you kind of get that idea early on, the
Mm.
possibility of that. And so I wanted to have people hemming and hawing over it. Like, okay, maybe the twist is like, you know, I wanted to keep it going for so
Yeah.
long that people would be like, well, maybe the twist is that I'm wrong and that she's
Right.
not, and that there really is something weird going
Yeah.
on. And then once you get to that point, then you find out that the real big twist is that his parents weren't murdered by magic users. They were, you
They,
know, it was a totally different scenario that
right.
kind of upends his whole reality. And then, you know, and speaking of twists, there's another twist after that, because
Yep.
he has another twist after that where he discovers the things that he's been doing that he thought were good things were actually very, very bad things and leading to very bad outcomes. And that he is the monster that created his own like hell, basically.
Yep.
Like his obsessions, his ego kind of create all of the bad scenarios for him. You know, he's trying, like, throughout the whole book, he's trying to solve these, you know, problems big and small. And by the end, I wanted it to show that all of these things come crashing down around him, like all of the layers of things he thought he knew. Like, not only does he love his city, he's obsessed with hating outsiders. Like, he
Right.
doesn't just be like, oh, you're not an insider, he hates you for being an outsider. So
Right.
when he learns that uh, the hunters of magic users, the render tracers, the glass eyes, when he learns that one of them, like an important one, has come to the city, he does everything he can to not be anywhere near that person. because he
Right.
doesn't trust him. He hates people who are not from the city. He thinks anybody from the capital or from any one of these other things that's not a local, like he trusts his local magistrates. These two
Yeah.
dudes who he spends the first chapter interaction with them just talking about how stupid they are and
Yeah.
how incompetent and lazy and awful they are. But then the rest of the book he's talking about how much he trusts those people more than anybody from outside the city.
Right.
And so it's like this constant
So
um
where does that
contradiction there.
where does that specifically come from? The hatred of outsiders.
I,
Does
I
that
mean,
tie
I
back
just
to
wanted
his
him
parents, or was he?
yeah, well, that's tied to it's tied to his sense of worth is tied to how great his city is. Like
Right. Okay.
he and that is sort of fit into by how much he loves his parents for raising them there and so on and so forth. But
Yeah.
more than that, it's just like I come from here, so this has to be the best place.
It has to be.
Because
Yeah.
if not, then what am I worth? You know, that kind of
Right.
that mentality. Um, subconsciously, like that's not the
Right.
conscious thing. It's like, but on
Right.
the subconscious level, in his mind, he's like, well, the place I come from has to be the best place because if not, then I'm if the place I live is worthless, then I must be worthless too. That kind of
Right.
mentality. And so he angrily rejects outside stuff. He just does like I don't want, I'd rather starve to death than owe you a favor.
Yeah.
Mr. Outsider, kind of a sentiment from him.
Right.
And it turns out like the whole time, like by the time he actually runs into this, outsider from the capital, it turns out that this person could have solved his biggest problem before people actually got hurt.
Yeah.
And if he had just not been so uh wedded to this idea that he hated outsiders and outsiders couldn't possibly help him,
Yeah.
like if he wasn't so wedded to that idea, some of the people in Tenement Lane and the little boy that tries to befriend him, that wouldn't have suffered the same fates that they did
Yeah.
had he just accepted help from the outside.
Yeah.
Because even as he's asking, finally breaking down and asking for help when he's in a state of absolute crisis, he still doesn't believe the guy's going to help him.
Right.
When he breaks down and says, okay, everything is falling apart, everything's a disaster, me and my sister are in trouble, and it's my fault, all of this is my fault. I need to reach out to this person who and see if they can help. And even as he's reaching out, he's like, he's not going to help me, he's not going to
Right.
do it. And then he does.
Yeah.
That's another one of the twists, is that like the guy who this whole time he thought isn't going to do it, he's just some clout chasing important, want to be important person. Turns out no,
Right.
this guy actually is legit an expert of stopping magic using serial killers. Because that's, I mean, that I guess
That
we skipped
was
that part. Like the obsession that Jathan has is not just following around magic users residue or whatever. His
right.
obsession is following a specific serial killer
Yeah.
that he learns lives inside, or at least he haunts Tenement Lane. I like to put it that way. He's kind
Yeah.
of like you never know it. He could live in a nice house in another part of town, but at
Yeah.
night
That's
he
kind of what I
haunts
was wondering.
he kind of haunts the city,
Yeah.
and he walks through and he has his meals there, he meets his lovers there, and then he goes around serial killing,
So
magic users and anybody else who stumbles across him and tries to mess with him, of course.
I'm curious because you know, thinking back on it, we really don't know a whole lot about Seber.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, what were his like motivations? Like why Tenement Lane? Like why is there?
He's a straight up serial killer. Like
Yeah,
I mean
okay, psychopath.
his motivation is he's like, he's a serial killer. Like
Oh, okay.
like any like he is like a Jeffrey Dahmer type
Oh,
person
okay.
with superpowers.
Got it.
So he's you learn like he's a very charming individual. Like he has a lot of lovers in that area and whatnot. So he's not he definitely is in control of his environment. Very charming individual.
Right.
He gets off on killing magic users, men, women, children, you name it. He loves murdering them. And
Huh.
so, and then he likes to go get a sandwich afterwards,
Yeah.
and then maybe meet up and hang out with one of his, girlfriends. Like he's that kind of, like, there's no traumatic inciting incident for him. He's
Right.
just
A psycho.
psychopathic. Like
Right.
he's just unhinged madman, basically.
Right.
So he's kind of like the force of nature in the story. Like
Right.
and I kind of like that aspect a lot. Like I like to have, villainous characters, but I also like to have villains that are almost non-villains. It's almost
Hmm.
like they're a tidal wave, or a tornado, or
Yeah.
a wildfire, or some kind of, or a
A
flood. Like
wild animal.
they're almost like an event that you
Yeah.
have to work around. And like Kinragan, in the villain in We Break Immortals, was kind of like that. I mean,
Yeah.
he did some pretty villainous stuff too. He was definitely a predator.
Yeah.
Um and had to be stopped. But a lot of the story is him being like this force
Right.
that's in the background, because like and then the bad characters, the actual villains, are the people who are uh trying to take advantage of that situation, like the Lord Protector or other people. And in Monsters We Feed, you find out that the real villains are the people that the main character trusted the most, his
Yeah.
own local magistrates, his own local police force. They turn out to be the true murderers. Like
Yeah.
it turns out, and that's the dark twist at the end
Yeah.
of the story, is
That
that
was wild.
they were using Jathan's clout as technically a member of this semi upper class, even
Yeah.
though he and his sister make like no money. They
Yeah.
basically work like, you know day jobs at bookstores and bars,
Bars.
and then go
Yeah.
spend their money drinking and partying at night. And most of their partying is funded by their friend who works at the money changer, which is the banker.
Right.
Kristen. Kristen is the one who like funds most of their partying. But because he technically is part of this class because of where their house is, these magistrates are using his clout to check a box that
Right.
allows them to drag in anybody they want off the street, and then burn them alive,
Yeah.
or what, because that's the punishment for
Yeah.
rogue magic use, or
Yeah.
undeclared magic use. And so he finds out that at the end, that his actions were allowing these guys to, no questions asked, like go grab young women off the street,
Yeah.
abuse them, and then have them executed publicly because they can claim that she's an illegal magic user.
Right.
And that basically destroys him. Like
Yeah.
every part of him gets slowly destroyed throughout this story, but that's the last part of it, where he realizes that he is unwittingly every bit as much a monster as Seber Gedekar, the serial killer that he's been following around.
Yeah.
And he may even be responsible for one of his own best friend's sister's murders, because
Yeah.
throughout the story they keep meeting, they party every night, every chapter or every other chapter, they're, at another bar hanging out with their friends, and one of their friends keeps talking about how his sister's missing, and they keep giving him, advice and whatever. And then at the end he finds out, okay, maybe I'm responsible for that, you know
Yeah. Yeah.
unwittingly, of course, but like that's like the final core part of him, is like, wow, literally everything I knew has just been obliterated in my mind, and I have
Yeah.
to start over from scratch to get an understanding of my world.
Right. So at the end, we talked a little bit about his obsessions and how he views outsiders and stuff, and he makes a
Mhm.
lot of progress in this book. But at the end, we see him going to what I assume is Amagon, right? Or
Well,
wherever
I
they.
mean, technically they're in Amagon. Technically,
Oh,
Kolchin
okay.
is like the southernmost, because Amagon, for those who don't know, that's where We Break Immortals begins. Because Aaron, the main character from that book, he works in uh, Vithos and sometimes in Medion, the two big northern
Right.
cities, the big, real big important cities in the north of Amagon. And Monsters We Feed takes place in a different time than that, but it also takes place in a different part of the country where Colchian is more like a backwater. It's considered like a backwater city, like a place that used to be important 100
Right.
years ago, and now it's just kind of like, you know, worn worn out,
Yeah.
full of corruption, like and Sarker, the glass eye that Jathan meets in this book, is sure to point that out. Like, this
Yeah.
city you think is so great. I mean, they had to ban people carrying swords on the street because you were dueling each other to death so much because of how out of control this place was. So,
Right.
but yeah, so they're at the end of the book. They're basically leaving. He's finally come around to see Lyra's point of view, and they're going to go on a journey to some other city, like
Right.
in some other city, like, and they're going by boat, so it's presumed they're either going, to up the coast to the northern seas of Amagon, or maybe crossing the sea and going to a totally different country. um,
Okay.
but it's they're leaving that city and going somewhere else for the first time.
So do you think that Jathan, even though he does make a lot of progress in this book, do you think that whenever he gets to where he's going next, does he still does he get there and kind of looks down at everybody
he
like,
he will still have flaws.
yeah,
He will still have flaws. They will be different flaws, or smaller flaws that become more magnified. But he will have some of the same. Like, he will still have his obsessive need to know things
yeah,
that are going on around him. He will still have his sense that he can figure out things about the world around him or whatnot, and know them. He will still struggle with his ego. But I mean, the big things that are changing are obviously his feeling towards people with magic powers,
right,
because that and it's not 100%. Like, it's
yeah,
there's like a dichotomy in it, because on the one hand, the foundation of why he hated them is gone, and so from a rational perspective, he understands or recognizes he should no longer hate these people, but he has hated them for so long that it's hard to stop that reflex, in
yeah,
his that mental reflex, to automatically hate people who have magic. And so he will still struggle with that. It's not going to be
yeah,
the main thing that he
right.
struggles with, but those things are still going to be there. Those things will take time.
Do you think,
I'm in the pre-writing for a potential sequel
oh,
of where
cool.
things are going to go. um and it will take place in a new city,
Okay.
one that he has to learn from scratch, and we'll see how things go.
Okay. Do you how do you have an idea of how far in the future from this it is?
It's going to be almost right away.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, a few weeks, a few months,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, but it's going to be directly after that, because his arc is not quite finished. He has
Okay.
not quite gotten to where he needs to go, and
Okay.
also there's a lot more things that his sister Lyra and his other friends are going to get up to. There's
Yeah.
still more to the story for some of the side characters, like Nessa. Lyra obviously
Yeah.
has more going on, but they're uh, maybe not in the sequel, but you may get some other characters might pop up eventually, like Ben Shine and some of the other people from Tenement Lane.
Okay.
Um, uh, uh, you know, I won't. I don't know about in the sequel, but it's possible Jancy Wake may show up again.
So here's a
Um,
here's a question.
you never know.
I was gonna ask this. Do you when you were writing this, was there ever a moment where it was either gonna be Janzi Wake or Nessa, or was he always gonna end up with Nessa?
Yeah, well, to a certain extent, yeah, because I really really love the dynamic of both of those relationships.
Yeah.
Like, and you can tell that that he and Nessa are volcanic romantically, because of a certain way that they interact. But he and Jancy are also volcanic because she taps into a totally different part of his personality.
They're
So
very
like
sexually attracted.
well, I mean, it's same for, I mean, clearly
Oh, Nessa too, yeah.
the Nessa too. So it's yeah, so it's he's being pulled in two different directions in the
Right.
book in every possible way.
Yeah.
You know, his what, you know, his life
Gay
like what he
life and
wants
nightlife.
versus what he feels obsessed to do. His life in the nice part of town versus the life he wants to pursue people in this bad part of town.
Right.
uh that, you know, so every he's being pulled in different directions in every possible, way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I sort of, it's in my mind, I'm like, man, am I team Nestiver or am I team Jancy? I don't know, am I team so but ultimately, because of the change, like,
Mhm.
because uh Jancy is the kind of person who is not going to leave
Right.
where she is,
Right.
because her because basically what happens is the tough part about magic users in this poor district is they're not only hampered by um uh their illegal magic, they're also hampered by the poverty of the area they live in, and the complete ambivalence of any government entities in
Right.
their city to do anything about it. I mean, there are only a handful of magistrates in the whole city that actually care that Severgeticur is running around killing people,
Right.
and they try to arrest him and he just kills them,
Yeah.
and then nobody else ever goes after him. Like,
Yeah.
nobody, at least nobody from calls it, like, that's, I mean, Sarker gets called in, um and whatnot, but like, uh the locals are just like, yeah, whatever. Like, the local magistrates, like, you find out some of them are on the take from this guy. They're like, yeah,
Right.
you know, we'll let him wander around as long, as long as he keeps things under control. The local gangs are cool with him,
Yeah.
except when they make a mistake and
Right. Yeah.
step out of line. But like, from a structural level, like, this serial killer is like almost built into the society there,
Right.
and so the poor magic users they never have a chance to make the life for themselves that they want.
Mm.
They're frozen in time basically by the presence of Sebergetiker, because they can't even sleep at night,
Yeah.
because like Jancy Wake, like her, like, the reason her last name is Wake is because her job is to wake up with the sunset and
Right.
then run around on the rooftops of Tenement Lane, along with other people that you don't meet, but there's more
Right.
people like her who find out where Sebergetiker is and follow him, and then run ahead to warn the people from there, the magic user from there, to get out of the way of where he's going.
Yeah.
Like,
And
that's
that's
literally
every
all
day.
she does. Like,
Yeah.
she doesn't have a job other than that. Like, the people in their area, they give her food and places to sleep in the daytime, because they consider that job so important.
Yeah.
And so they're constantly being preyed upon by corrupt magistrates. They're being preyed upon by the gangers,
Yeah.
who run the neighborhoods there, and they can't break out and do, for like, and Jathan has this conversation with her in the book, like,
Hmm.
i can't I can't make this world the way you want it. Only you guys can do that. But what I can do, but right now you guys are like locked in a room. You're
Right.
never going to be able to make the world the way you want it to be and make real change while you're locked in this room. So let me unlock the door
Right.
and then get out of your way so that you can make, by getting rid of, like, that was his promise to her
Right.
toward the end, after he has his big one of his big breakdowns. He's like, okay, I will stop this serial killer. I will, if it's the last thing I do, I will stop this serial killer so that I can open the door for you guys to then go and try to make the world, change, the do the systemic change that needs to be done,
Yeah.
that I can't do.
Right.
Um, and so she is caught up in that. So she's going to be doing that for a long
Yeah.
time. Like, she's like, her whole goal is now to improve the situation of her community of magic, not just of the magic users, but of all the people in Tenement Lane, and try to improve things.
Yeah.
And so she will not be traveling to distant shores
Right.
in the sequel.
Yeah.
If there's a third book, if there's another sequel, there may be a visitation of her.
Right.
Sarker may make an appearance in this sequel because Sarker he goes all over the place.
Right.
He's kind of a mobile guy, as is hinted in We Break Immortals. He's not in
Yeah.
We Break Immortals, but it's hinted that that's
Right.
his job with Aaron in We Break Immortals when he's a very old man. Like in this
Yeah.
book, he's a young man in Monsters We Feed, because it takes
Yeah.
place, in a different era.
It
So
was
he's a young man.
it was so wild to even see him after hearing so many mentions of him throughout We
Mhm.
Break Immortals. And then I'm like, oh, like I am like looking at
Yes.
Sarker, someone that I
And
haven't been able to
I
see
I
yet.
wanted, and I hope this came across, but I wanted people who had read We Break Immortals, and because Aaron like worships this guy.
Yeah.
Like, this dude is his mentor and his idol and his replacement father figure. Like, he adores this guy, even though this guy is allegedly supposed to be this crotchety old,
Yeah, it's kind of a dick.
house MD kind of you know jerk person, but he is the best, like
Yeah.
literally the best, possibly the best that's ever been. And so I wanted him to come across in this book. I wanted you to see when he actually interacts with Jathan and with the other characters. I wanted you to see and be like, oh, I get it.
Right.
I get it now. Like, when he has that conversation with Jathan, like he walks up to him and he's like, hey, blah, blah, blah. And they have that really contentious argument where
Yeah.
Jathan, uh, get out of here outside. I don't need you, blah, blah, blah. And Sarkar is explaining to him what he does, like
Yeah.
specifically. He's like, there are people like me who hunt for people who steal, steal, or who beat people up with magic, or who, whatever kind of crime you can think of, peeping toms,
Yeah.
theft, arson, vandalism, whatever. There are people like me that do that. I don't even get out of bed for those kind of crimes.
Right.
I,
Yeah.
and he's like, and I wanted him to come across as the dude who can
Right.
get stuff done. He's like, they don't even call me unless nobody else can do it. Like,
Right.
so that's why I'm here. And so he's trying to convince Jason that he can trust him. And he's like, this is the reason. Like, I know everything about you. I can do this. I can do that.
Yeah.
And I mean it, and I'll back it up. And then when he does back it up, like, he is the man.
Yeah.
Like
It was
he
so
shows up,
cool.
and I was a little worried about it because in fantasy books you want to have the big showdown with the big, and to a certain extent there's a little showdown where the big serial killing wizard, super powered guy briefly has a little confrontation with people, but um basically Sarker just shows up and he's like, oh yeah, you just can't use your magic now.
Yeah. Yep.
Not because I'm a wizard, but because I did my homework for like the
Yeah.
last like 3 months, and I
Right.
did all this stuff and figured all these things out, and so I just know how to make you not able to use your magic.
Yep.
And now I'm this skinny old dude, and now I can just smack you in the head with a cane,
Yep.
and now you're just like, I
It,
wanted him to be that instantly powerful type of individual to be worthy of Aaron's praise in We Break Immortals. So I hope that kind of came across.
yeah. Yeah. And it was awesome too. He has this great monologue with Sever where he's like, you want to go out in a blaze of glory. And let me tell you, it's not going to be a blaze of glory. It'll be more like a whimper, like a dog.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
He lets him
dude,
have it. He's like,
oh
yeah.
man, that was such a great monologue. I wish I had written a bigger chunk of it down, but it was so good. Just that whole moment, I was like, holy shit. And then he's even so revered and just high up in this whole organization that he tells the Lord Marshal to call off
Oh
the
yes, yeah,
arrest
yeah.
for
Because the magistrates show up to arrest Jathan and his sister
yeah,
after it's all over. Like, it's still not over. Like,
yeah,
they still have these problems because they were publicly seen fighting with other magistrates, even though it was the corrupt ones who were trying to kill him.
Yeah.
and trying to cover up their own corruption by killing him. So now real magistrates, ones that aren't totally corrupt, show up to arrest him and his sister, and yeah, basically Sarker just bosses them around.
Yeah.
They're like, go bring me the most important person in the city, and I will tell that person to tell you what to do, since you
Right.
don't believe you're not obeying me. And so they go get the most powerful person in the city, and then Sarker tells them what to do, and they just do it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted him to be like this, like, whoa, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Like, what? And when you're writing that kind of thing, like, the whole point is that Jathan is his own worst enemy, because Sarker could have solved almost all of his problems.
Yeah.
Because
If
if
he had just done it
because
from the
Sarker
beginning.
shows up in the city, because the glass eye that Jathan finds the monocle on his body, the glass eye who was there, who got jumped, was the guy they sent before they sent Sarker.
Right.
So he's basically like the second or third or fourth or whatever best glass eye in the kingdom or whatever.
Yeah.
And so when they found out that, oh, this dude got jumped and got murdered, and couldn't he got so turned around trying to chase this serial killer that he got jumped by gangers and this and that. So
Yeah.
that's when they sent Sarker in.
So do you
And so yeah, so he's like the guy,
yeah.
and I wanted him to have that feeling of how connected he is. But in order to do that, I had to, Jathan's his own worst enemy. He hates outsiders so much he won't even talk to the guy. They
Right.
mentioned that this glass eye from the capital shows up. They mentioned that in like the second or third chapter. And he's like, screw it, I'm never going to talk to that guy. If that guy comes over here, I'm going to run and hide from him. No way.
Right. Right.
And then it turns out, oh, this is the man who could have solved all my problems, but I
Yep.
couldn't get out of
Like,
my own ass long enough to
right.
accept that
Yep.
as the truth. But yeah,
Does Sarker care or even know that Jathan has the Jekker monocle?
I think he does, but like I like to I believe that he does know. I think that's the way I wrote it in in my notes. But
Okay.
it's again that situation of I don't I don't give a shit. Like,
Right.
yeah, I know that you did. I don't care. You
Yeah.
know, I get reminded of the scene from have you ever seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the old
Long time ago. Yeah.
okay, there's a scene where his buddy, who is also a hitman, they send out an alarm, and it's like, oh, your best friend now has a hit out on him for $500,000. He's like, I don't even get out of bed for less than $1 million, and then he goes back to sleep. And so Sarker's kind of like that guy.
Yeah.
He's kind of like, whatever else is going on, I don't care. Like, I'm obsessed with this one thing that
Yeah.
is my job. I'm the best at it. Everybody knows I'm the best at it, so they send me to where I need to go to do this stuff.
Right.
And anything that is even remotely not part of what I'm trying to do, I do not care. Like, I
Right.
don't care about the graffiti. He's like the homicide detective. He doesn't care about graffiti.
Yeah.
He's not going to pull you over for speeding. He doesn't
Right.
care.
Right.
That's so far beneath the
Yeah.
scope of what he has to do. So from that regard, I don't think he actually cares that Jathan has it,
So
because he even says, if somebody picked up the entire vault of your bank and
yeah.
walked off with it and stole the wealth of your entire city, I wouldn't care.
Right.
I wouldn't
Right.
care. That's not what I do. So I don't care. If some magic user kills somebody because they walked off with the vault, then I care.
Right.
Then I'll be there, and then I'll take care of business. But until then, no. So
Right.
he's
That's
very much a
awesome.
one-track mind kind of individual.
Yeah. I wonder if Sarker knows, or even, I don't know if he would even remember who Jathan is by that point. Probably not. But I wonder if he knows that Aaron's parents are Lyra, and that
We
Jathan
will
is
find
related to.
out.
Okay.
We will find out things like that. It's hinted that he was aware, because he talks about how Jathan and Lyra's parents were very well known and well thought of,
Oh, okay.
and revered. But he says it in a way that's almost like he knows a little
Right.
bit about them before he even got there, kind of a thing. because they
Okay.
were murdered, what, 10 years, 10 or more years before the events of Monsters We Feed. So it's hinted that he's aware of their, at least aware of their notoriety for being, good people. So there may be that he may have this. We'll see,
Okay.
but you'll find out because there's going to be other stories, not with
Right.
Jathan and Lyra, that Sarker will appear in. He's going to
Right.
be a
Okay.
kind of a recurring character in some other events that will kind of fill in more of the events leading up to We Break More. Like I have a project I'm working on that's kind of more along the lines of a direct prequel
Okay.
that takes place a couple, like 2 or 3 years before, or maybe 4 years before We Break Immortals starts, that kind of gives a lead up to that, to show. That's my cat knocking over my water. Penelope, what are you doing? Come on, man. She'd get antsy. So yeah, so there's things that I'm working on, but Sarker is kind of a recurring character. He's kind of an iconic character who just always exists.
Okay. Well, I have another kind of question and thought here. I thought it was really interesting that in We Break Immortals we get to see Aaron's point of view right from the very beginning about how much work actually goes into being a glass
Mm-hmm.
eye. And then in this book we see Jathan kind of like, those glass eyes don't actually do anything. The monocle does everything for them. And he couldn't be further from the truth. And so I'm curious if Jathan's point of view is kind of how the rest of the world views glass eyes.
Well, Jathan is kind of his own
Right.
thing for
Right.
sure. But like, glass eyes are kind of they're either feared or respected in a lot of cases. I'm sure that sentiment exists.
Right.
Probably exists a lot more in Colchian than in other places, just
Okay.
because of the environment of in Colchian is it's more common to have those feelings of negative feelings about outsiders, just because of the nature of there's kind of a self-loathing response to people in Colchian, because Colchian used to be this jewel of a city, 3 or 4 generations before, and now it's just not.
Right.
And so the people living there are in this world are kind of, they kind of have a chip on their shoulder because they're kind of defensive about it.
Yeah.
They're kind of jealous of the other cities that get all the prime attention now.
Right.
Even though their city didn't get attention in their lifetime, they
Yeah.
have, it just they have this kind of mentality of it. But Jathan takes whatever mentality he has to the absolute extreme. So yeah, there are probably people who have different degrees of mistrust or whatever. Um, but you see in We Break Immortals, because that's Aaron's job too, you can see that the people that he's working with, they listen to him with rapt attention. Like they fear and respect what he does greatly. So it may have a certain bit to do with Jathan, but also a certain bit to do with just the way Colchian culture is.
Right. Okay. There are a couple quotes that I wanted to tell you I really
Oh, sure.
loved.
Yeah, I did have some quotes in there, didn't I?
One of
Some
them,
quotable lines.
yeah, dude, man, there was quite a few. There was so many times throughout this whole novella that I was like actually laughing out loud.
Yes.
Any of the times where like Jathan was just hanging out with his friends and kind of
Mm-hmm.
shit talking, and whenever they were at the what is it called, the bottle bottom
Oh, the
is
bottle
the,
bottom. Yes.
yeah, whenever they're there I loved those scenes so much because it just felt, there was just like an energy in those scenes that felt like friends hanging out at a shitty bar and getting into trouble, and it was so cozy, and I,
Perfect.
I loved it. I
That's
loved
exactly what I was going for. I'm glad that came
it.
across, because I wanted it to feel like an authentic
Yeah.
group of friends with their own different personalities and way interactions with each other. And yeah,
Yeah.
so
So one of the quotes I really loved is Lyra is saying to Jathan, if you want me to swallow a load of shit, you better serve it in spicier soup than that.
Oh.
I
Oh
love
yeah.
that. That was near the beginning, I think.
Yeah, that's when I mean, he's straight up bullshitting her from the first chapter. He's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 I want to go down and see if that guy's okay. And she's like, you're going down there to loot that guy's
Right.
pockets.
Yeah.
Don't
Yep.
don't feed me that horse crap. I
Yeah.
know what you're doing.
And that scene too, when they're trying to like, I think they're trying to make their way back from that, and they're trying to get up the retaining wall, and it's a really close thing because one of the gangers is chasing after them, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that whole scene was so intense. It is so intense.
I actually that's where that chapter is where I first start telegraphing that Lyra might be
Yeah. Yep.
powered because
I remember.
there's a part where he's like, oh my god, she's gonna tip over backwards, I'm gonna have to, like, he's in his head, like he's holding on for dear life, and he sees her starting to lose her balance. He's like, in his head he's already like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to go back down there, I'm gonna have to, like, she's gonna fall, I'm gonna have to like go down and get her, and how are we gonna get out of this? And then he looks up, and then suddenly she's up above him again.
Right.
And so that was kind of the first sign where maybe you could play it off. Oh yeah, maybe she's just a
Right.
Cirque du Soleil style acrobat, because they talk about that too, about how
Right.
fast and acrobatic she is. But that's kind of my first hint that, oh,
Yeah.
maybe she has a little bit of extra zhuzh.
Yeah, that was something that was really rewarding, because in that scene I did not chalk it up to anything magical. I just thought that she was like acrobatic. But then later looking back on it, I'm like, "Oh, I that's how she's so good at the acrobatics." And
Mm-hmm.
it was
Yeah,
really
I try to
cool.
make it really subtle so
Yep.
that it would be on a reread. It would be rewarding to find a lot of those little moments and whatnot.
Yeah.
There's also speaking of, since we're in full on spoiler talk and
Yeah.
whatnot, I'll give you one other little thing, because I don't know if you went over it, but when Lyra is explaining to Jathan, at the end, or near the end, when she's coming clean to him, because she's been lying too, and
Right.
but when they talk about, like, she admits that, like, she should have told him this stuff sooner, but you understand why she didn't.
Right.
You also wish that she did, but you understand why she did. It's kind of like with Jathan too, with some of the decisions he makes. You're like, I understand why you're doing that. I wish you hadn't done that.
Yeah.
But so it's kind of a little bit of that. His is more extreme. Again, everything he does is more extreme. But she's talking about, like, this is what really happened with our parents. I tried to look up stuff. I tried to find out what really happened, like, because the magistrates who came to take them down, they covered it up,
Right.
and it may have been like a corrupt thing when his parents were killed in general as well.
Yeah.
And they're talking about, well, I couldn't even find any of, I tried to track down the glass eyes who took down our parent. Like, I got a hold of the actual report in the archive. Like, I had somebody sneak it out, like break it out for me. I wasn't supposed to see it.
Right.
But all of them, like they're all dead now, or they've moved away or retired. And she said, I only found one of them who was young enough to still be alive. His name was Aldarian. And he moved north to Vithos, I think, or something like
Hmm.
that. She's talking about that. And I left that in there because that's the name of the Lord Protector in We Break Immortals. We're not
Oh
going over
shit.
spoilers of that, but that's another little Easter egg I threw in there, that he may uh, be way into fucking over Aaron and his family quite a bit more than even Aaron is aware.
Wow.
If you
I
think
did
about it,
not catch that. That's awesome.
because I it's kind of ambiguous as to whether or not taking down his parents was a corrupt act. Because at the end of Monsters We Feed, you find out that at least the magistrates he was working with were totally corrupt and were
Yeah.
totally just dragging in whoever and doing whatever, and who cares. So it makes you wonder whether his parents were taken down corruptly also. But you
Right.
know, but anyway, but that's just another little a little tether between the stories for
That's
people
that's
to.
awesome. I definitely didn't see that one coming. I have another quote. Jathan would have shit his pants if they weren't already around his ankles.
Ah, yes. Chafin gets
Cause
stuck in some pretty sticky situations for sure.
oh my
Yeah.
god, I thought
Worst.
it
Yeah.
it's
Worst
it,
time for a bunch of your enemies to walk in on you is when you're
with your pants down.
post immediately post coitus.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a rough deal. That's a rough deal.
And it's such a good line too, because it's not like it, you almost have to like take a second to think about it, because it's like, oh yeah, he literally can't shit his pants because he doesn't have them on. I just
Right.
it
I mean,
worked
it
on
was a figure of speech, but
it.
like a figure of speech taken,
Yeah.
into the a more literal joke. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I thought
but
it
yeah,
was
you're like, oh
fantastic.
yeah, because at the beginning of that chapter, you're like, oh yeah, these guys just showed up, and he literally his pants are around his
His pants
ankles.
are
Like,
around his
oh man,
ankles.
like he can't even run. He has to
Yep.
stop and try to pick his pants up first. So
I see you mentioned this a couple times in Monsters We Feed. Every time Jathan comes home, he feels, I mean, at home, but he also kind of describes this warm feeling of a fortress. And, he goes out during the day and he's stressed to the
mhm.
highest degree. And he feels like the entire world is on his shoulders. And then he gets home and he feels like he's kind of cut off from
Mhm.
all of that. And as I'm sure you have as well, I've experienced that many times in my life where, throughout the day I'm at work or whatever, and I'm thinking of all this stuff I have to do, or,
Yeah, you're dealing with
if
all
I'm,
that chaos. Yeah.
back on bills or whatever or something. And it's like all of this is hanging over your shoulders. But then you get home and you kind of turn on your TV or you get onto your laptop or video games or whatever, and all of that kind of is able to disappear for at least the
Yeah.
night.
Yeah,
And
you're in your castle.
right.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I loved when he mentioned that. I was like, oh, like I really relate to that. I think we've talked about most of these other ones. The other one that I thought was really cool, the gangers at the end, they're crowding around Jathan
Mhm.
and Lyra, and one by one all of these heads start popping up on the buildings around them. And I was like, oh shit, it's more gangers. What are they gonna do? But it wasn't. It was Jancy Wake's people from Tenement Lane. And
Yes.
I thought, dude, there is, for some reason, the trope of the cavalry is just over the hill coming to
Mhm.
save the day, that never ever gets old for me. It's my favorite thing in fantasy. And so
Yeah,
I love it.
a lot of people were not as a criticism, but were like, man, the final 25% of the book is just nonstop.
Yeah.
Like, get out of one frying pan into the fire, into another
Yep.
frying pan, into another fire. Like, it's just just keeps going. Like, as soon as you think you got rid of the bad guys, there's another bad guy to deal with. Get rid of
Yep.
that bad guy. There's another problem to deal with. Get rid of that problem. More bad guy.
Yeah.
So it definitely is nonstop toward the end with the way it hits. So
Do you think will Jancy Wake's people be taking down this I forget what the leader of these gangers was named, but
well,
will they be dealing with him?
yeah, things are going to change
Yeah.
in Tenement Lane for sure. Like that the and as with all systemic things, there's no magic bullet to solve every problem overnight, but
Yeah.
Jathan, he did obviously he didn't do it himself. He facilitates things. Like
Yeah.
he got rid of Sever by making the deal with Sarker.
Yeah. He's the
Um,
middleman.
and so but Sarker couldn't have done it without Jathan. Like, and he
Right.
even says so. He's like, you're the man I need to talk to because you're the only one that can solve this unsolvable problem.
Right.
And I'm not like the reason that I can find people and find the people that I'm going after is not I don't my eyes can't see them. I use tools to do it.
Right.
I'm not doing it alone. I'm using this. So you can help me solve this problem by solving the one problem I don't have a tool for.
Right.
Kind of a thing. But like Jathan, like technically he kept his promise to her. He's like, I will. You guys are locked in this prison by this. This serial killer has your whole community locked in a prison of fear.
Yeah.
And let me unlock the door of that prison so that you can get to work solving the societal and systemic problems in your city. And so
Right.
yeah, they'll definitely are now on a more even footing.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
after the that confrontation there.
Definitely.
Um, But yeah, so they have a lot that now the work can actually start
Right.
on that kind of thing of evening things out or possibly taking back their streets from those corrupt gangers.
Yeah. And at the end there, after all of that, there was, throughout all of this stuff, Jathan is badly wounded, and
Mhm.
I actually thought you were going to kill him off. And as
Funny
we
thing about that
were you
is
about to?
that there are two endings
Oh,
to
okay.
not two endings. There are two final pages
Okay.
of the monsters we feed, and there's one, and they're identical up until the last page.
Oh, interesting.
So the only difference is that when Lyra is talking with Jathan on the boat before they're about to shove off at the end,
Yeah.
and then Nessa comes over and starts talking to both of them. In the other version, Nessa comes over and says, "Lyra, who are you talking to?"
Oh, that's great.
So I did have a version of the story where there was a, so there is technically an alternate ending, and
Yeah.
I hemmed and hawed about which version to use until the day I submitted the book for publishing, basically.
Okay. Wow. That's
Because my
crazy.
because to on the one hand, my mo is to kill off main characters, like
Yeah.
that's what people expect. So I thought, what better final twist
Yeah.
in a book full of twists
Yeah.
than for me to just go against my natural instinct of killing people off
Yeah.
and leaving things open ended into the future.
Yeah. I
But
so
the best
I
part is, if there's a sequel, I have the opportunity to
right.
maybe or maybe not kill them all over again. So
Right,
you
right.
never lose that.
Yeah, I would have loved that ending too, but I'm really glad that cuz here's the thing. This is what I loved about the ending was you have this book that is so I mean, it's enjoyable to the nth degree, but it's so stressful. Like Jathan is always kind of under the wire. There's always something hanging right above his head.
Yep.
And then you get this ending where you're finally able to, they're all on a boat together. Some people died along the way, but they're all together. They're sailing off into the unknown. Very hopeful, very like happily ever after. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like the book kind of needed that at the end of all this other stuff happening. So I'm really
Yeah, it
glad that
was
you kept it
pretty
alive.
tense for most of
Yeah.
the book. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good come down from
Yeah.
that to be like, ah, it's kind of
Yeah.
like the sigh at the end.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
But I do have this quote there at the end. Seber had missed just wide enough, and Lyra had dragged him just fast enough, and Trabius had been just skilled enough to see that one more sunrise would splash across his face. And that's just such a good line. That's such a good piece of writing. I love that.
Yep. I
Yeah,
love that one too.
that was one where I was like, okay, I got to write that one down. So let's talk about real quick. I only have a couple things. Let's talk about some world building stuff. I don't think there was anything specific in this book that made me think of this, but it was just kind of something I thought along the way. And this may have been answered in We Break Immortals. I'm almost certain it was, unless I'm misremembering. But with this magic system, is there a way to heal as well as to create projectiles and stuff?
Um, yes, insofar as if you have the technical knowledge
Like that,
of
like
that,
actual
because
like
they
doctor
still,
knowledge. Yeah.
there are people in this world that most people don't have the kind of technical knowledge that we have in our world, because this is kind of like a late medieval, early Renaissance
Right.
type hybrid environment. Now that being said, there are some leaps in invention that they did not have at the time, because they're kind of and they don't explain it in Monsters We Feed, but in the world in general, magic is based on hacking physics,
Right.
basically, like aspects of the world. You're basically like rewriting physics equations or taking numbers and adding your own kind of, that's kind of how I chalk it up, is that you're making it so that when a fire burns, it doesn't actually heat up the room, it makes the room colder or something, like that
Right.
kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
Or the most basic thing is just to create shapes with mass and velocity in them
Right.
that don't exist, or make flat planes or surfaces, or make, you know, lines, like slice things or whatever,
Right. Right.
stuff like that. But you can also do complicated things like change how much pressure is in the air in a room
Mm.
until the person inside it implodes, you know, things like that.
Right.
You can mess things up, but it's all based on your knowledge. Like, you can't know how to do that if you don't know what pressure is, or how it
Right.
works, or how to excite molecules and things like that. And so science, like books about the natural laws of the world, are repressed heavily in this world.
Okay.
Like, there are religious orders, entire religious orders devoted to finding, basically like finding the equivalent of physics textbooks and burning them and
Okay. Wow.
eliminating them, or at least keeping them for their own organization and not for um, others. And so there's
Right.
like, it's very limited how many people know about it. But yeah, there are a few people who know how the insides of bodies work because they've used magic. Like, there are people who can make, you know, they can make microscopes by making lens shapes with
Yeah.
curves appear
Right.
out of nowhere, like not a real glass lens, but like a shape that
Right.
bends light the same way. And by experiment, you know, so there are some people who are experimenters that can do stuff like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can create a pressure bandage by just creating a
Right.
blank solid shape and pushing it against, having it push against a injury, create means of reducing swelling and things like that. So
Right.
there are things that you can do. There are things
Okay.
that can be done for that, but it's not, you know, it's restricted by the knowledge of the people in the world doing it. Like, not everybody knows the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Even if they have those powers, they may not, they may not know the right thing to do
Okay.
for it. So yes and no, kind of.
Okay. Cool. Another thing I wrote down, and I actually don't remember this in the book, and I don't remember writing it down.
Oh.
But I had written Jathan's parents worshipped gods, and I think I assumed that it was like the followers of the sorcerer in We Break Immortals. Does that sound right? Did
That's what
his
he
parents?
thinks.
Okay, okay,
That's what he thinks. He thinks that they were part of some kind of, you
cult or
know,
something.
happy sunshine, you know, type cult type, you know, thing. Like, dance out in the forest in a circle, and, you
Right,
know, throw things at the maypole, whatever. That kind of thing. But in actuality, it was not that. He was just misinterpreting
what they were.
what they were doing, and what they were really doing was using these specific ointments that are designed to wipe off the residue of magic.
Right.
And so he is inventing in his own head, or just assuming in his own head, the reason for why they must be doing this, because they can't possibly have been magic, like, you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah.
that's one of the ways that he figures out that his sister's telling the truth, and that she didn't just, you know, bullshit him with all this stuff about his parents, is that he realizes, oh my god, these jars, these colored jars of like salts and ointments and soaps and whatnot, this is the same shit that glass eye pulled out of his thing. This is the same
Right.
stuff that they all use to clean out. And he's like, oh, so basically that was him assuming they were part of that kind of a religion, or whatnot. But what it actually was just them, you know, ritualistically removing the stains of magic
Right.
so they wouldn't be caught by people. So
Okay. And then there's a quote that I think we see a couple times in this book. They say the "until never meets forever" thing a couple times. Like, I'll be waiting until never meets forever, or I'll see
mhm.
you when never meets forever. Is this a popular saying in this world, or is this a saying that Aaron
In
learned from his
Amagon,
mother?
yes. In Amagon and the sister kingdom of Lenagon, yes. So
Okay.
because that's uh, in We Break Immortals, that's what Seb and Kelowin and Orinus, you know, what they say to each other as well. So
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
kind of like a thing. Yeah, it's kind of like a saying in that part of the world, in because they're in the same place.
All right. Well, going into our final thoughts here before we head out. One of my questions was, will we see any more of these characters? But it sounds like we will. It sounds like we'll see more
Yes,
of
yes.
Lyra and
I
Jathan.
the weight the weight has shifted far enough in that direction that I'm
Yeah,
going to go ahead and do it. Yeah,
that's
enough people have asked that
yeah.
that I'm starting to get ideas. So
That's awesome. Yeah, as soon as I mean, even before I was halfway through the book, I was like, I want more and more of these characters because they were fantastic.
yeah, you'll see some familiar ones and probably some new ones and probably some unexpected ones.
Okay. And then the last question before our penultimate question, I guess. Are there any connections to We Break Immortals that I may have missed at this point? Or like, is there
Um,
any other
let's see.
little
You
Easter
got the
eggs?
one about Lyra's connection to Arin.
Hmm.
I explained the connection to the Lord Protector.
Right. Yep.
Um, let me see. And then Sarker, who is mentioned in We Break Immortals, but appears in there.
Right.
Um, there's no other specifically stated connection, but there
Okay.
is another connection.
Okay.
I put in some like parallels that you probably wouldn't notice. Um, but there is another secret connection in there related to another thing in We Break Immortals.
Okay. Like a parallel between Jathan and Aaron, or like a character arc parallel, or
No, just some things that happen, like the way that Jathan solves some of his problems, just
hmm.
kind of his personality, and then some little symbolic things in specific ways that he does some things in some action sequences that may have parallels. But I'm going to keep that one under wraps
Oh, I see. Okay, so this
for
is
a while.
something that'll be addressed later. Okay,
Correct.
got
So
it.
yeah, eventually I'll get more now that I'm doing a sequel, I'll probably get more specific about that as well.
Right.
But I really prided myself on the fact that not only does Jathan never pick up a sword
Hmm.
by the hill, he never actually intentionally kills anyone in the entire book.
That's what I forgot to talk about. When he so you'll have to remind me. There's a scene where there's a guy in an alleyway, and does
Yes.
Jathan like accidentally or like try to push him or something, and he dies in a crazy way.
Yeah. He just happens to fall the right way to bang
Yeah,
his head on a pipe
that's
and
right.
cracks
Yeah,
his head open. Yeah,
yeah,
that's the only person that Jathan physically harms that results in death. And
yeah.
it was an accident. It was a complete
Right,
accident. Every other person that dies is him facilitating their death by
right.
way of serial killer,
Yeah,
basically. He's like basically like
yeah.
using the serial killer as his weapon to get rid of the people who are after him in more than one instance, actually.
Yeah, that scene in the alleyway, I read through it once and I was like, "Wait a second," and I had to like reread it again because I was like, "Wow, that was why I wasn't expecting it
Because
at
it
all."
happens really fast.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was like, "Wait, he's dead? Whoa!"
yeah.
It's awesome. And then, yeah, I guess lastly, I'll just say, because we just mentioned it a few minutes ago, was the whole Easter egg at the end there about Lyra and Aaron. That dude, you have no idea how rewarding that was for me. I mean, I'm sure you do know how rewarding that was, but
Well, I'm
like,
glad it was. It was
yeah,
meant to be. So for
like,
people who read We Break Immortals.
oh man, being such a fan of We Break Immortals and then reading through this book thinking that there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. Like I
Mhm.
wasn't expecting any sort of connection. And then getting to the end there and seeing that, I was like, oh, it was so good. It was
Good.
everything.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, do you want to talk about anything that you're working on right now or anything that's
Well, just
upcoming?
the sequel to Monster We Feed is still in the pre-planning stages.
Sure.
So the shovels have not started digging
Hmm.
on that one yet. That one is in the idea stage. But I'm currently just now, I have finished another standalone book that takes place in the same era as We Break Immortals and kind of concurrently, timeline wise, concurrently with the sequel to We Break Immortals. And the actual sequel to We Break Immortals is almost all the way done as well.
Oh, okay.
So it will be going out. So both of these will be going out to my beta readers and getting prepped for uh, final edits probably this month.
Okay.
The one of them this month for sure. The actual true sequel to We Break Immortals is going to be maybe next month because I'm still doing a little bit of final revision on that one.
Right.
Yeah, I might also be releasing some sections of the sequel to We Break Immortals
Okay.
as standalone little teaser novellas.
Oh, cool.
Because I have a couple of the first half of the book is going to be the four main point of view characters all on their own journeys, and they all kind of have sub conclusions to those little journeys, like cliffhanger ones, but you know.
Right.
And so I'm probably going to be releasing uh, those as kind of like a intro to stuff.
Okay.
And so I picked a familiar recurring character and then a brand new character that no one has ever seen before. Because those are probably the two least spoilery
Yeah.
of that. Like I can't do Aaron's chapters
Yeah.
because he's constantly you know how he gets. He's constantly moping and
Yeah.
about the things that went wrong and trying to figure out the ways that he could have done things so they turn out right. You know, he's Mr. Over Analytical, so he's constantly thinking about what happened in We Break Immortals and what he could have done differently and what he hopes to do differently
Yeah.
in the future. So he brings up a lot of that stuff. So he's almost like a walking recap, for Christ's sakes, when it
Yeah.
comes to We
Right.
Break Immortals.
Yeah.
So I couldn't
That's
use
perfect.
him. So the recurring character is clearly there's only other one I could choose from is going to be Corin.
Right. Okay.
So we you may get to see a advanced intro to what Corin gets up to in the sequel, and then this other new character will also have. I may even give the Corin one away for free,
Okay.
uh,
Cool.
you know, as a newsletter, magnet kind of thing,
Right.
because his storyline is a lot of fun. A lot of people love Corin,
Yeah.
and he gets to be even more of himself in
Nice.
this, and a lot more of it too. He gets a lot more
Page time.
page time for sure.
Okay.
Almost like the characters are almost equal shrift in this one. So
Right.
it's a little bit different. Like in We Break Immortals, the storyline was very Aaron centric. So in that one, uh, he got probably 60 to 65% of the page time, and then Karn and Kellowin had to split the
The
remaining
rest. Yeah.
30-ish%. They did get to be in some of his chapters too, of course, but it
Right.
was a lot more of our story. This one's going to be a lot more even handed. Aaron's going to be more like 29-30% of the page time, and then the other characters will each be whatever 24%, 23%.
Okay.
So it'll be a much more even split. So you get to spend more time with each of the characters and
Nice.
see what's going on.
Cool. So as far as just two last quick questions for what you just said there, the what's the not release schedule, but like the chronological
Are
order of what you're releasing?
probably so the releasing, it's probably going to be this standalone one might end up being released first,
And that's the one that runs concurrent
just
to.
because of the timelines for editing. Yeah, that's the one that I literally finished writing the last scene this morning.
Oh, okay.
um so that one's going out, and so just and it's also shorter, like it's
But it won't
maybe
spoil We Break.
less than two-thirds the length of We Break Immortals. It's probably exactly in between Monsters We Feed and We Break Immortals as far as page length.
Okay.
So it's going to be faster to get feedback from, faster to edit, faster to revise and proofread. So that one's probably going to be faster to printing just because of those features. Because the sequel to We Break Immortals is pretty enormous. It's going to be bigger than We Break Immortals,
God damn it, Thomas.
for sure. But it's going to be a lot more action, a lot more events moving forward, a lot less. Even in the slow scenes, it's things that are moving the story forward to the next step. So
Right.
it may be a more. I think it'll be a more entertaining read, honestly, than We Break Immortals is.
Okay.
Even though it is a little bit longer, you might read it faster, just because um,
Okay.
it gets going a lot faster, obviously, because it gets to start in the middle of a story, and
Right.
you don't have to uncover all the stuff like you do in a, sequels present their own challenges, but they also have the benefit of, like, you don't have to reintroduce the carryover characters. You don't
Right.
have to fully 100% re-explain all of the stuff. Like, you might have to do the minutia, but like, people will remember that there's such a thing as glass eyes in my world. They'll remember
Right.
there's such a thing as magic users and kind of what they can do with magic. They're going to remember that there's this organization or that organization. They're going to from recaps, they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is the villain who lived, who might cause a problem going forward.
Yeah.
And so from there, it's just a matter of introducing the new characters,
Okay.
and getting there. But I like it a lot.
So
It's turning out pretty
the
good.
standalone that'll have characters that we've never seen before.
That Yeah, that's gonna be 100% you've never seen,
Okay.
100% unrelated. I mean, I don't want to say 100% unrelated, because technically there's
There'll
a
be
connection
connections and
between
stuff. Yeah.
it and one of them. Kind of. But it actually does take place chronologically in the world,
Okay.
concurrently with the We Break Immortals and its sequels. It will take place in the same time frame. It'll just
Okay.
be unconnected,
Right.
at least beginning. I might eventually do a crossover, but we'll see.
Do either of these books have a title yet? And for the sequel, will there be like a story so far kind of thing?
Yes, yeah, I am going to do a recap
Yes.
from
Thank you.
Corin's POV. Corin will be writing the recap himself,
Okay.
so hopefully that'll make it entertaining.
Yeah.
And so they're still juggling some working titles on those at the moment.
Okay.
One of the books will be named, I believe the sequel is going to be titled The Heroes We Could Have Been.
Okay.
So that most likely will be the sequel title. But things are still slightly up in the air at the moment.
A little shifty. Okay.
Correct. It depends on where the editing goes, because the sequel, as I mentioned, is quite large, and it depends on the machinations that I use for revision as to whether I can trim it down to a manageable size to use as one book, or whether I will have to come up with a second title and split it into two books again.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
Okay.
that's where this side story was originally characters from the sequel,
Yeah, and you're like, I gotta move this to
who
its own.
originally these characters had like 6 or 7 chapters each, as kind of just a little intro to who they are and a little intro story.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I can't fit them, so I'm going to cut them out. I'm going to make them their own thing so that people can get a shorter thing. And that ended up ballooning to be a pretty big book, just based off these characters. But it's
Okay.
going to be somewhat less magic centric, and somewhat, kind of like the Monsters We Feed. It'll be
Right.
more like self-contained in its area, uh, of what's going on, and not concerned with big world events, as it were,
Right.
as you get with We Break Mortals. But
Okay.
it'll be another interesting entry point to Luminaworld. It's going to involve the dynamic between, like, a retired, aging past his prime drunken knight with a lot of trauma and a lot of, like, injuries, and him in a castle with the other main character being the young, precocious, magic wielding daughter of the lord of that castle, and
Okay.
them trying to uh, protect their family and their friends and their home from these interlopers that have showed up.
Okay,
So,
cool. Awesome, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on here and hanging out. And
you bet, it was a privilege.
dude, I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I love these books so much. and I cannot wait to read the next one. I can't wait to reread Monsters We Feed. Even just like talking about this right now, I'm just like, oh, I really want to go back and reread Monsters We Feed. Um, and yeah, I'm so excited to see the sequel and what happens to Aaron, and just really, really excited. But yeah, guys, all right, that is going to wrap us up there. As always, you can reach out to us on Twitter or Discord, which is linked below in the description. You can support us on Patreon if you feel so inclined to do so. That really helps us out. If you can't support financially, then you can like and subscribe here on YouTube. That also helps us out a lot, because that way we get seen by the algorithm more, we get seen by more people, and get to grow our little community here. I don't really know what episode is coming up next. I'm not quite sure what's on our schedule after this, but we will see you when we post the next thing, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. And a big shout out to our first Night Angel tier patron, Shad Zaman. Thank you so much, man.